What's going on, y'all? This is Alexander. You are plugged into the Nerd Companion. What's going on, y'all? This is Alexander from The Nerd Companion, coming at you with some housekeeping stuff before we get the episode started. You can now watch video versions of the podcast on YouTube at The Nerd Companion. Make sure you throw a like, subscribe to get all of the video content from this point forward. If you do prefer to catch it on the audio side, we are still on Spotify, still on Amazon Music, still on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts from. I would like to ask a huge favor from all my listeners, my followers, viewers, now that I'm on YouTube, is to throw a like, subscribe, share with a friend via word of mouth, or sharing it through a text message or whatever social media platforms that you use. I would deeply appreciate it. You can follow me on Instagram at _nerd_companion on Instagram for all Nerd Companion podcast updates and shorts. You can also do the same thing on TikTok at _nerd_companion on TikTok. They both post the same content on both Instagram and TikTok. So if you follow one, it's fine. You don't have to follow both. But if you follow both, it's all good. I appreciate it. Without further ado, let's get this episode rolling. This train goes on forever. Stay starving. What's going on, y'all? This is Alexander from the Nerd Companion. And today we are going to be talking about Stephen King's The Dark Tower, Book 3, The Wastelands.
Cannot wait.
One of the members here of the Ka-Tet, Guy.
How y'all doing, y'all?
Great. What do you think about this book?
This one's pretty high up there for me. Very much enjoyed The Wastelands. Trying to think how I'd rank it, but I forget what we had. I think we did a ranking early on in the pod, so revert back to that if we did. I would say it's a very solid book. A lot of crazy stuff happens, which we love. Of course, it ends on like a cliffhanger, which we'll get to. But outside of that, it's damn near perfect as far as the storytelling and moving the story forward.
Yeah, it's pretty good. I think this book right here was the one that really got me engaged. Even though the pacing itself is a little scattered, I was given what I wanted in regard to seeing the mid-world, like focusing on mid-world.
Yeah.
Get to explore it a little more.
Mm-hmm.
But that was probably some of my biggest compliments to the book. I would say probably negative points on the book is, again, some of the pacing, where there's kind of like these little lulls that Stephen King does. I'm sure everyone, probably the same thing that people complain about. They don't really, gets too deep with he reminds me of Tarantino films where he will set the setting and draw you into a scene that's naturally occurring. And it's almost as if he's doing that just so he can set up like a big pop in the middle of a scene. Like if you watch Tarantino, have you seen a lot of Tarantino films?
Yeah, most of them for sure.
Like for instance, Kill Bill, in one of the first scenes where I can't remember her name, but she's basically shows up at that girl's house, the first girl's house, and they're talking in the kitchen for a long time. Yeah. And then almost immediately, like there's gunshots, blood, and then death immediately. Yeah. And I feel like Stephen King does that. And I feel like those who aren't patient don't really reap that reward, but those who follow through with the scene setting reap the benefits, I feel like, in this case. Sure. But yeah, let's jump right in. So we left off from the drawing of the three. Roland has now 2 additional party members in his group, moving towards the Dark Tower, moving inland away from the beach. They're walking through the forest, and at this point, Roland is basically training Eddie and Susanna, and we get the mantra that is forever echoed throughout the series. I can't remember how it goes. It's like, he who aims with his eye has forgotten the face of his father. Yeah. I aim with my heart, or something like that.
Yeah, it's basically that. It's like, I do not aim with my eyes. He who is aims with his eyes has forgotten the face of his father. I do not aim with my whatever. Yeah, it does a few of those, and then
you really get to see the
fire. You
see the importance of the respect of elders in the mantra of this creed, the gunslinger. But so they're in the forest. Roland is training Eddie and Susanna as gunslingers, and I want to say that Eddie ventures off away from both of them. I can't remember what he's doing, but ends up getting introduced to a big monstrosity, Shardik, this giant mechanical bear, and Eddie runs and climbs through this tree, and Roland and Susanna hear the commotion, and they basically find Eddie up in the tree with this bear, basically trying to, claw him out. Mm-hmm. And Susanna recognizes a weak point in this big bear, and it's called like the thinking cap or something, but she ends up shooting it, and the bear falls out. But what we learn about this, I think Roland talks about it, is that this is actually one of the protectors of the beam, one of many beams that hold up Midworld. That the way I imagined it was that these beams run like slices of a pizza, and you have a guardian for each end of the slice of the line where it's cut, and they guard the beam to hold the tower erect so that all of existence is solidified, basically. And so we're seeing Shardik, who I don't think would necessarily attack, especially, well, maybe it would. I can't quite remember, but
yeah, he's gone insane at this point.
Yes,
so,
yes. Yeah, I wasn't sure if it was the insanity or he was just attacking more ferociously because of the insanity. But there's something awry with the beams because at this point we know that the antagonists, or the League of Antagonists at this point, because we don't get a clear picture of who all is involved, but we know that the antagonists are working towards bringing the tower down, which is the entire premise of the story. Roland needs to get to the tower to save it so all of existence can continue to be. But yeah, so Shardik has gone insane. They go through this fight and end up defeating Shardik, which saves their lives, but at the same time, you've killed a guardian of the beam, and now things are a little more volatile and unstable. And from this point, they know that they are on the beam, and this is the path forward. If they keep moving forward down this beam, they will eventually get to the Dark Tower. So now we've set forth with at least a clear path to where we are going.
Yeah, I thought it was really cool how first when they kill Shardik, they find what in my memory is something like if there was like a door, it obviously blends into the forest they're in, but a door almost like in the middle of this forest. You can imagine like a little, brush around it and everything, and it's a door that is closed. Eddie walks up to it and kind of falls into a trance and has the whole thoughts about, there's no sound in the halls of the dead. And then that ties into future things, of course, but you start to kind of see Eddie having this ethereal ESP, whatever you want to call it, kind of living on a different plane of existence. So you kind of see this starting with Eddie out of nowhere, because as of now, he's just gotten to the Roland's Earth, basically. So you start to see this, and it's like, well, what's that about? Like, Eddie's clearly got some kind of special, ability or special, level of existence on another plane.
Do you think that this is the touch? Did you read The Shining?
I didn't, but my brother, who you should be seeing on the other podcast, he mentioned that like there's a touch, and then same thing with what was the other one that he did? The other movie they did.
might have been Doctor Sleep.
Doctor Sleep,
because
yes.
it was a sequel too.
Also mentioned in that as well. So yeah,
I think in The Shine they call it The Shine.
right.
Yeah, and so Stephen King does a really good job of like interweaving his other works into this, as it's basically his multiverse. I think we talked about it the first episode that this is the first time I had experienced, at least on a literary stance, a multiverse unfolding into other works of his.
Yeah.
So which was very interesting because the first book I ever read was Salem's Lot.
Oh, okay.
And
yeah,
then I read The Shining. And then I got into the Dark Tower series. But so there was a little bit of similarities that I caught up on, which I found probably engaged me more in this series because I was like, oh man, there's so many like ancillary things here that, I find interesting. Like I wonder if other people found it as interesting too.
I know what you mean.
So Eddie, we see possibly has the shine, or he has the touch, which is kind of like what you said, this ESP, this like, telepathic, or I'm not sure if it's telepathic. He basically just is able, he's like a seer. He's like a...
Yeah, it's some kind of consciousness on a different plane, higher plane, separate plane of some sort. Because it's not like what Jake has. Like Jake can actually touch, like you'll hear in book 4 with I forget his name, one of
Elaine.
Elaine, thank you. Like Jake has that same type of touch, which they call it the touch. So for Eddie, it's almost more of like just a connection to whatever Gan or whatever you want to call it. Gan is the their version of God, but it's something like that because throughout this story, the Wastelands, Eddie's getting these almost like other level, I guess, direction on what to do next. He'll start whittling, which we can actually lead to next. I think this happens during this section here. After Shardik, he finds, is it here where he finds he sees something in the wood, in the tree, I believe, and he like pulls it out or cuts out a piece of the tree bark and kind of sees something in it.
I want to. I probably
have to pull up some wiki facts for you.
He ends up. I'm not sure if he has if it's Roland's knife. Roland gives him. He ends up with a knife, and then he picks up woodworking. I guess because when you stop heroin, you start finding things to do.
There's just nothing
like,
to do. Woodworking would be like whittling like an old person. There's nothing to do if you imagine. I mean,
and he gets pretty good at it.
Yeah,
he gets pretty good at it.
Yeah.
So Eddie and Susanna and Roland, the Ka-Tet, their group, their party, they're moving forward, and at this point, you're introduced to, as you mentioned before, Jake, who was killed or had died in the first book. If you remember, he was the boy that Roland had let fall through the depths so that he could reach the Man in Black. Mm-hmm. So you're basically reading a chapter of Jake. You're like going, wait, I thought Jake died. So Jake,
we should say too, when you said moving forward, it reminded me. So we mentioned how there was a door. And how Shardik protected that beam, the path they currently go to, because at this point, like Alex said, they're going from the beach into the forest. There isn't really a direction, I guess, at this point. But when they find Shardik, Roland explains if we hit the door and face the direction the door's facing, we're on the actual path of the beam. So now we're officially, for the first time, on the path of the beam.
And if I remember correctly, I believe they said if they looked towards the beam, there was like this natural like path. Yes. Even though there was like things in the way, you could see almost as if there was like a splitting of nature or whatever that was organically there to signify that there is a power here.
Yeah, I imagine it's almost like if you were like looking, like you would almost see like trees slightly bending in a way, or maybe like the leaves are all moved in one direction. When you're on the beam, you can kind of see everything kind of almost tunneling in that way. So it's got to be something to that effect. But yeah.
I was so fascinated by this because you see Jake. He is having these conflicting thoughts because he's telling himself he's waking up and he's like, I should be dead. Like he remembers dying very vividly, and yet he's very much alive, and he has this entire memory of being alive, but has the incomplete memory of being in outer world. Was it? I can't remember where it was, but wherever he met Roland, at the way like he has these clear memories with Roland.
That would have been Midworld, I believe.
Yeah. So he has these memories, and then he's like doesn't have these memories. So in a sense, he's literally going insane. He's having these like visions, but knows he wasn't there, but knows he was there. And so we see like this meld of like almost like these universes melting together into his head, and it's driving him crazy. And we're also seeing that with Roland as well.
Yeah.
Like because he's forgetting, he knows for sure that Jake never existed, but then he remembers clearly that Jake had existed. And Eddie and Susanna pick up on this. And I'm not sure if Roland goes into it with them. Does he talk about it?
Yeah. So it's one of my favorite lines. I can't remember if Frank Miller or Frank Muir, the audiobook narrator, took over for this book. I believe he did, and his voice for Roland is so awesome. But there's this moment, because throughout, like Alex is saying, there's these moments where Eddie and Susanna kind of look at each other, where they see him like have some weird like reaction.
You're tripping.
He's like, yeah, they're literally like, this dude is going crazy. And then finally, Roland is sitting there. I think they're sitting down at a campfire, and Roland just looks at him and he's like, I'm going insane. Like in his Roland voice, and you're like, oh shit! Like he just admits, like straight up.
I wonder if they're just
I'm going crazy. It's like, oh man.
I wonder if they sat there and like, what did we get ourselves into?
Yeah.
You just trust this guy now. He's going crazy. He's like, this is not a good idea.
We just jumped into a whole new world with you, man.
What else were you gonna do?
Yeah, now he's going crazy. But that's I like how you made that point. It's almost as if there's like if you saw like two, you know how they say like in the whole like universe theory, it's like if your world you're in branched into another world. So now there's like two separate worlds. Both of their minds are trying to like correct that, basically. So they're going insane thinking both things are happening at the same time. So their brain is like fighting itself, basically, both Roland and Jake. And that's kind of leading to their thoughts of going insane, basically. And Roland's like to the point where he's not even himself. And, you know, he's one of the most stable, you know, collected people there are. So it's pretty crazy.
Yeah. At this point, so we're following Jake's story. He's in New York, and there's many points in Jake's story where you're reading and he's opening doors and he's almost expecting to see another world. Like he knows he shouldn't be expecting it, but he's opening it and he's knowing that there's something supernatural going on. But then he knows that it's crazy to think that. I think there's a moment where he opens a door and he's like staring, and then this girl is like looking at him like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Like, what are you doing? He's like, I just thought I was going to see another world.
Yeah.
And she's like, what?
Yeah. So it's the great callback that Stephen King does throughout the entire series, but obviously a key arose. You'll see that a lot. I believe he mentions that in one of the books. But basically, we obviously had our doors in the last book, and this is the same continuation. So just like we know when people are drawn into Roland's world, they're going through doors. In Jake's mind, he's almost subconsciously knowing I'm supposed to be going through a door. So he starts seeing every door that he has in front of him, whether it's at school, and it's either like he's at like the bathroom or something, or he's like, I think that's what happens when the girl's like, hey, like, what are you doing? And he's like, I think he's even gonna like go into a girl's bathroom because he doesn't know. He just thinks on the other side of that door literally is opening up into this other world. He doesn't know exactly what that is or what, but he knows he's supposed to be going through a door. So that is his mind, you know, trying to reconcile, basically.
It's like a gravitational pull.
Sure.
It's like the fate, like his destiny, like he's being pulled and almost hypnotized in a sense that he knows subconsciously that he has to go through this door.
Yeah.
There's going to be a door, right? And what actually was a cool scene that I actually really liked is that before he gets to a door, a meaningful door, he's following Eddie and his older brother down the street. A much younger version of Eddie.
Much younger version of Eddie.
I think so, maybe.
Yeah.
He's with Eddie and his brother. Oh, what's his name?
Oh, Eddie's brother is it's Eddie Dean and the great sage and eminent junkie. I would have known it if you didn't lose it. Like, you losing it made me lose it in my brain. I was like, now what is it? I don't remember either. The great sage and eminent junkie is he always hears him in his mind. Eddie's older brother.
Golly.
We'll Google it. And,
It's fine.
Yeah.
So he's following Eddie and his older brother, and Jake ends up going into a bookstore and ends up snagging a book, Charlie the Choo Choo.
Charlie the Choo Choo.
Oh, Charlie. It's about... it's kind of like a Wish version of Thomas the Train, I think, is what the vibes I was getting.
Yeah.
Off
Off of Wish. Thomas the Train off of Wish.
So he ends up getting this book. He doesn't really know why, but he knows he has to get it. I can't remember if he nabs it or he just reads it and puts it back. But there's
So
something.
he meets a man named Arthur Tower, I believe, who runs the book. Calvin Tower, I'm sorry.
Calvin Tower.
Calvin Tower, who runs the book. Arthur's talked about between Calvin and Jake because they're talking about the knights of old and everything.
I believe he's a reoccurring character, Calvin Tower.
Does, yeah. He comes back again. He's a very annoying character, which we'll get to at some point. But basically, Jake is talking to him. Calvin Tower's kind of shooting the shit with Jake, like, hey, you're a young kid. What are you doing skipping school? But Jake's going crazy, and literally he makes this kind of joke to Calvin where he's like, don't you have to go back to school? And he's like, no, that way lies madness. But really he's being honest. He's like, no, I'm going crazy. But Calvin thinks he's joking around about school. So he's like, oh, you're a funny kid. He's like, you know what? Here, take this book. So like, I think he wants to take a book because he sees it and something about the book tells him he's supposed to have it. And I think Calvin just says, like, you can have it because I think he doesn't have cash or something, and he just tells him you can have it. It's something like that. But yeah.
I think it's also important to know that before Jake left for the house, he stole his dad's gun.
Oh, yeah. We did jump over a portion here. So Jake's insanity has reached such a level that he decides to leave home. Of course, leading up to this moment, before all that happens, the big kind of break for Jake happens where he really thinks he's gone off the cliff, basically, and he decides to turn in. I don't know how you don't really see him filling out his final assignment, but it's time for him to turn in his assignment for class, and he's at a very prestigious school. And when he turns in the class, it's nothing but gibberish and scribbles. He looks at his paper, and it's literally talking about all these crazy things. And he's like, okay, they're gonna find out I'm crazy because I have to turn this in, and it's nothing but like gibberish about what's happening. It's like it's like crazy. I forget what it says, but it's like a manifesto from a crazy person, basically.
Yeah.
And he turns it in. He goes home and he assumes he's like that my parents are going to be ready to like send me to an insane asylum. And when he gets home, his nanny is like, "Hey, you have a note from your teacher," and he assumes it's going to be something about what's wrong with you. Are you okay? And she happens to think that he's writing this like beatnik, higher thought kind of paper, and really
of the mind.
Yes, really, he was just going crazy. And she's like, I love how you categorize the doors and the train and thinking all these things, but really his mind is going so crazy. He's seeing all these things that are going to be coming because of course he has the touch, but he doesn't know that yet. His mind is literally just racing and going crazy. So his teacher thinks he's writing this metaphorical piece on his life, basically. And that kind of sets him up for the thing. And then of course, he decides to leave, realizing like he's supposed to, something tells him, I guess he's supposed to leave. But before that, we should mention, even before that, we're getting ahead of ourselves. During this psychotic phase when he's decides to skip school, I think the first day that he decides to skip, I think it happens twice if I'm remembering correctly, but he's walking along and all of a sudden something tells him he's supposed to go in a certain direction, and that leads him to a key. But that key is on the other side of a fence, so he goes to this vacant lot. He goes to the vacant lot and he realizes something's pulling him there. So this sense of rightness is pulling him there. Finds the vacant lot, and when he gets there, he starts hearing angels sing, and he's like, "Oh my God!" Like something, like literally hearing angels, like a choir in the back of his mind. Jumps over the fence, sees this flower. I believe, if I remember, he has his first moment. They each get a moment in the vacant lot, but I believe that's his first moment in the vacant lot, and he sees the rose, I believe, at this point. And if, to my memory, the rose unfurls and he sees worlds inside of this, a sun basically inside of a rose, and breaks down crying. And then if I recall, he comes back around, like realizes what's going on, and the rose is gone, but there's a key. So he takes the key, and when he grabs the key, all the voices in his head that are freaking out quit. So he realizes while he's holding the key, this crazy, thing that's going on subsides, so he can actually live a normal life. And that's what leads him on this journey. So he takes the key. When he goes home at that point, that's when his teacher or his nanny says, hey, you have a note from the teacher. All that stuff happens. And I'm guessing because he had the key, whenever something tells him you're supposed to use this key, I don't exactly remember, but he's sent on a journey. His journey begins at that point. So that's how it kind of all comes into play. And that's his first encounter with the Rose, which we'll get into a lot throughout the story, of course.
So he's making his way, and I think
making his way downtown.
Smirking around.
Going crazy in my hometown.
So he grabs the gun because I think he has this underlining feeling that he is going to expect danger.
Yes.
Which rightly so. And I want to say he follows again. So yeah, going back to where he's following Eddie and his older brother. They come to a vacant house, which I want to say was a house they used to use in. I'm not sure. I might be stretching that.
A house that what?
They used to use in, like, do heroin or something like that.
I don't remember that happening specifically, but it is.
Shit up.
So that house is like the scary house that all the kids avoid, basically. And
Right.
it's like, they literally have like, that's the house you like dare your friend to go in because it's so scary type of thing. Also, we're getting ahead of ourselves again. I'm like, dang, man, I'm just remembering all the amazing things here. Just so y'all know, we do this off the dome here, all right? So don't come at us, all right? We're off the dome. Another part of the key, in a sense, it becomes a shulpada, which we'll get into in a little bit. But when Jake takes the key, he decides to leave on the same journey before he runs into Eddie, and still can't remember the brother's name.
I want to say it's James, but I don't know.
No,
Isn't
that's
that James?
We'll know when you get there. It'll be like, oh yeah. But basically, Jake is, he takes this key. He's left home, and he decides he's skipping school. He doesn't know what to do. He goes to a museum, I believe, and there's the scene where he's standing outside the museum, and this police officer walks up, becomes suspicious, like, why is this kid sitting here? Jake assumes his parents have already found out he's skipped school and he's gone, and the cops are after him, so he's super nervous. This cop walks up and asks Jake what he's doing, starts to become a little suspicious. Something tells Jake to pull out his key, and when he pulls out his key, it entrances the police officer, where he just stares and falls into a trance, basically, of the tower. Basically, is like controlling his mind.
All powerful.
And then every person walking by who catches a glance of the key starts to come over, and pretty soon Jake is holding this key in front of like 10 plus people who are all just literally zombies, just like, oh my god, like falling in love with this thing. Which they bring a couple things in the story that have the same effect, but just so we make that note for anybody who's really paying attention, the key clearly has some kind of mythical power tied into the Dark Tower. And then we're back on the story with Jake following Eddie, and God, it's going to come to me. Eddie and freaking, it's like Eddie Dean and something Dean.
Whatever.
We're gonna have to Google it just to put this thing to rest, because it's gonna drive me wild.
So, yes. So they come to the house, and I think something draws him to the house. He's got to go into the what would be the haunted house, and he's going in. And so let's put a pin right there. So let's go back down to Roland, because these two things are happening at once.
Yes.
And so Roland, as you said before, goes and tells Eddie and Susanna that he is losing his marbles. And this is going on for some time. And how do we find out that because I know we get to the point of where everything kind of comes together for the party, but what triggers that? Do they just come across the ritual ground?
So Eddie, and his brother's name is Henry.
Henry.
So Roland, thank you, Google. Roland,
Samsonite.
Roland's going crazy, and like you said, he's explaining it to them. So this is the one question that I had in my mind. I can't remember if he tells them. First off, he tells them what he's going through. He tells them that there was a person named Jake, and that what happens and all that. But I can't remember if in this reality they know about Jake, or if in this reality they don't know about Jake. Because in one world, Eddie and Susanna. Because in one world it happened, and one it didn't. So
I don't know why they would, though.
Well, the only reason they would is because he would have told them previously, leading up to this mental break. So I can't remember if Roland says, like, do you remember I told you about Jake? And they don't remember it, or they do. I think they don't remember in this world and setting, as if it never happened. Because in one world, Jake never goes into the, never gets pushed and never dies, never ends up in Roland's world. So I think they're currently on that path, if I remember correctly, because he's like, do you remember me talking about Jake? And they're like, no, you never mentioned a Jake before. I think that's how it happened in my mind. But either way, those two worlds are currently simultaneously happening. And he explains what he's going through to them. So he tells them there was a boy named Jake. He died. I sacrificed him to go take on, to chase down the man in black. So I think that is, that's definitely how they come to know about Jake. But yeah, that's how they know about Jake, is he explains that he did that, and then we soon start to understand what's happening as things kind of connect.
So Jake and Roland are both going crazy simultaneously, and they come across what appears to be a ritual ground. And the way they describe it looks like Stonehenge in a way. There's just like these little,
that's how I see it,
outcropping rocks in a very systematic way. And you see there's like this ground that is kind of vacant where a ritual had taken place or needs to take place. And I can't remember.
A speaking ring. And we know that this ritual site is inhabited by a demon. It's the same thing that he saw in our book one discussion. Whenever Jake disappears, he accidentally wanders into a speaking ring and is taken by what's not even a demon. It's a elemental, is what he calls it. Yeah. So as Roland explains, there's one demon, elemental, whatever, that guards a speaking ring. So he knows there's one that's there, and he explains we're going to have to go into it. But right before that, of course, what leads to this understanding, like we mentioned, Eddie with the key, or Eddie with the whittling. Eddie starts to realize he's whittling out a key shape. So while he's going, he starts whittling out a key out of this wood, and it starts to become he considers it the best thing he's ever whittled. This is on their way to, as they're traveling there. So that's kind of leading up to that point, basically. So they know that they're going to need a key to open some door somewhere to get Jake in, basically.
And this is like one of those moments that we're talking about that Eddie is like, he knows he's working on this wood project. He doesn't know why, but he knows he has to.
Yeah.
And so they're coming to the speaking ring, and it's inhabited by a demon. And I'm not sure who comes up with the game plan.
Roland, of course.
But essentially,
it's gonna get freaky.
Essentially, they know they have to draw. They know they have to summon. Does he know they're trying to get Jake at this point?
I think they know it's time to get Jake. I think. In fact, Roland feels the urgency of we have to hurry up and do this because the worlds are going to close basically if they don't do it.
It's like catching a train schedule.
Yeah,
is basically what it is. And they have this one opportunity where Jake is going into this house to get to the place he needs to be drawn, and they need to be in this ritual spot, and they need to have accessibility to draw Jake in. And I think Jake knows this going into the house.
Yes.
And they all know this going into the speaking ring. And it's like these two universes are meeting on, I can't even try to explain time space because I am too stupid to explain that.
This is beyond us, of course.
So, but it's like, I imagine it's like this enveloping, it's like these events are happening like in a cell, like these things are just floating, and like these 2 points of contact where Jake is trying to get to Roland, and they're walking into this speaking ring, and they need to be there at the same time and draw him as he's getting to this point.
Yeah.
So Roland comes up with a game plan. Of course, offers Susanna up to do the dirty deed. The only way that they have to distract the demon is that Susanna basically has to have sex with it, which is I found very weird. But I guess it plays into the story later. But to me,
like Roland explains, which we also talked about in the first book, it was a elemental who wanted Roland basically, and he to get it off of Jake, he slept with it. That elemental, same thing in the speaking ring. Roland explains to them if it's well, at this time, of course, we're assuming these demons are straight. Because he's like, if it's a male demon, or maybe he even just says, if it wants a woman, Susanna, you're going to have to sleep with it. If it wants a man, I'll sleep with it. Right. And he explains you have to throw your sexuality at it, which is like, what does that even mean? Yeah, but you have to like send your sexual energy towards this demon once it arrives, basically.
So it does want a woman.
Yeah. So we quickly find that out.
And so Susanna is basically kind of muster Detta. Detta basically takes over.
Yeah.
Which is kind of weird because I was like, man, I feel so bad for Susanna because, like, she has to kind of, like, press herself out of this picture for Detta to do it because Susanna doesn't want to do it. Because at this point, Susanna and Eddie are, like, a couple, right?
Yeah.
And
I think she calls herself Susanna Dean already at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
she takes this name already.
So
like
romantic.
Between book 1, between book 2 and 3.
So traditional, those two. So yeah, Susanna's got to bang the demon, and I'm not sure what Roland's doing. I can't remember, but I know that Eddie is now like trying to. Like he has the finished key, and he's now having to draw this door in the sand.
Yeah,
and it's like frantic. Like he's trying to. He has to draw it perfectly. Because I remember he was like worried about the details, and Roland's like come on, or like it was like this big like thing that they've got to hurry up and make this door into the ground.
Yeah.
And so while this is all happening, Jake is in a haunted house, and this house becomes alive, and there is a demon inside this house. And this house, basically, the way I thought about it is the boss in Final Fantasy VII, where you're fighting the demon door. And like the end of this one, it's basically like a demon that's like basically, taking form of like the wood, and it's like trying to reach out and like grab Jake, and Jake's just trying to open the door, but the door won't open because Eddie's not done drawing it in his reality.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like this race, but essentially Eddie draws the door. He uses the key to open it up. At the same time, Jake is opening the door, and as he's opening him up, like Roland is pulling him through. And there's like this moment where like everything just shifts into place. They remember that Jake was there. Like all of the insanity feelings that they were having at that point, like comes to a stop because now Jake is there. Mm-hmm. So, and I remember Jake saying, and like everything coming back so clearly, like promise me you won't drop me again.
Yeah.
And Roland's like, I'll never do that again.
Yeah. Because he realizes they both realize the history, and it becomes real. And, of course, Stephen King loves to give you this, but, of course, Roland in the back of his mind wonders if he is telling the truth.
And he asks himself that.
Yeah.
And even Roland in the back of his head is like, he says it, and then he's like, why did I say that? Like, would I really do that?
Yeah.
For the Dark Tower?
Yeah.
I would probably sacrifice every single one of you.
Like, so dark, so terrible, Roland. But yeah, that's exactly the which was really cool. But as a couple important key points, not to dwell too much on the demon sex part, but basically, which I always heard it in this way. I don't know why I think they make this Stephen King writes like there's just like almost like what I would imagine like when you break a mock speed when they go into the speaking ring. All of a sudden, it's like, and it starts to rain out of nowhere, and they see a demon moving through the grass. They don't see anything; they just see through the grass. If you imagine from far out, it's like coming back to its ring, like it was out wherever. And they entered it, and he realizes it, so he comes in. They immediately, I don't know how they tell who it is, but it goes for Susanna. She flips into Detta mode, and basically the demon starts to obviously do its thing. But what happens is she flips and turns into Detta mode, and Detta's completely crazy and psycho and starts holding the demon so it can't escape because the demon tries to get off of her, but Roland needs exactly the demon did what the demon came to do.
But Detta didn't get hurt.
Detta won't let it go, and it's trying to get out, but Roland has to hold it. So he's holding onto her shoulders.
You're doing great.
She's doing it. Literally, it's literally he's like
it's
trying
so
to
gross.
Keep her alive to protect Eddie.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's the key part, which becomes a huge thing later on. In the story, of course. But yeah, so that's basically what happens in that passing. And then what I thought was pretty cool too is they basically the way they explain it is there's a ground, and Eddie had to draw a door in the ground. He eventually gets the key perfect. He had to take one little extra piece off the key because he hadn't finished it the way he thought he did. He gets the door open, and if you imagine if you opened a door on the ground, you'd be looking straight down. But what they actually see is a sideways view of the house, as if you were standing up directly in a house. So they explain how pulling Jake through was somehow both pulling him up and like to the side, if you would, and he's holding him by his hair, yanking him through this door, which I thought was really cool, just to think about like going from one world into the next, like, and you're just shifting into this whole nother space. But that is the last person that had to be drawn from the drawing of the three. So it's really the book, the final part of the drawing of the three before they even truly enter the Wastelands. It's kind of how the book, in my opinion, that's how the drawing of the three really ends when you think about it. But
yeah. And I think that's what happens at the end of, and I think that's what sets Roland and Jake's insanity, was because they killed the person who was going to kill Jake. And so by killing the pusher, you had that like butterfly effect with messing with fate.
That is right. That's right.
So at the end of the book, you push the killer who killed Jake,
that is right.
who did, you kind of like messed with the future. You messed with the timeline. So that's why Jake is alive.
Yep.
That's why Jake is struggling with, well, I thought I died, but I didn't die. And then the same thing with Roland, because he messed with time itself. He intervened with that, dealt with someone else's fate that they all interacted with.
Yeah. If we didn't mention that in the last book,
we're sorry.
Yes, that literally happened. That's exactly what happens.
I don't think it needed to be said.
No,
because
maybe not. But
you don't know yet until you get into the Wastelands.
Yeah, when they're inside of Jack Mort, that's exactly what happens. Roland comes forward because he realizes he's about to push Jake, and he thinks it's the Man in Black. He's like, oh my God, this is the Man in Black about to kill Jake, but it was Jack Mort. So he comes forward in his mind and stops him from doing it, and that's when, that literally leads to him going insane. Like, you messed up, Roland. You made yourself go crazy.
You'll learn.
But yeah, so that leads us back to the end of that whole ordeal once they come in, and now things are more or less normal, and more traveling ensues. There's a good amount of traveling in the story.
But who do they meet? They end up getting a good friend.
Yes. So on their,
I would say pretty soon after that Jake is drawn in, they get their little.
Is this
little
before
friend.
they go to Aunt Tabitha's?
I can't.
So remember, they meet Aunt Tabitha on their way to Lud, but somewhere along this way.
I think always before.
Yeah. So before they, as they're traveling along here, there's a creature called a Billy Bumbler that comes into the story, which he becomes part of the Ka-Tet. But if you get a chance, listeners, look up, just Google some Dark Tower imagery. There's a lot of cool concept art for what a Billy Bumbler looks like. But yeah, it's like a mix between a dog and a raccoon.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah,
a dog and a raccoon.
With like a long neck.
And
basically.
he's like really happy.
Yeah.
Like he's always like, he's just very peppy.
Yeah. And he's different than other Billy Bumblers, according to Roland.
Yeah.
They're supposed to be more aggressive and like not human friendly, but he's
taken to Jake.
Yeah.
So they're taking the Great Road, and they come to a town of River Crossing. And let's see. Looks like it's inhabited by a bunch of old people, and I think this is where they talk about Tabitha.
Yeah.
But I don't know anything about Tabitha, so you'll have to go.
A bunch of grays are what they end up being called. There's grays and there's pubes, if I remember correctly.
Pubes die.
Yeah, pubes die. And this, to me, is another one. Like, book 3, to me, every book has such great cinematic appeal, but if you look at what book 3 is, it just has such great cinematic possibilities. Because you can just see.
I can't wait for this show.
Oh, it's going to be so good. But well, I hope it's going to be so good. But basically,
it's HBO. It's going to be good.
Yeah, I trust you, HBO.
Even as like mediocre as The Last of Us was, I was like, it's still a decent show.
Did you play the game?
No.
Okay, I didn't either. And I heard that they did a really good job though of keeping it like very game. Like, so I'm like, good. If y'all just like, it's supposed to be like the game is the show. So I'm like, if y'all just do that with the book, you'll be fine. Like, just
I didn't realize they were making a second season.
Yeah. I did actually fell off like the last couple episodes, but I will finish up. That's a good show. But yeah.
No, definitely finish it up.
Yeah.
There's definitely like a huge like morality question at the end.
Oh,
like,
sick. Nice. I like that.
Did you make the right decision?
Oh, nice. I like that.
You should watch it.
Yeah. So same thing. I hope they do that with the Dark Tower. It's like just follow it to the T.
Surely it will,
and we'll be okay. Or even a little, you can go off the beaten path a little bit, but just try to follow the path of the beam.
Yes. Don't forget the face of your father, HBO.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, no. So They meet Aunt Tabitha, who is in this group of all older people, basically. They bring them in for dinner. They have a good time. I won't get too much in the detail, but basically there's not much there besides Aunt Tabitha, when they decide to leave, gives Roland a necklace and asks him to please take it with him and I think lay it at the Dark Tower and speak her name. And Roland promises to. Basically, in meeting her, he realizes she's such a great person. They tell them a little bit about what's going on, because every night, which we didn't mention, they hear the God drum. So after Jake comes and they're traveling, they start to hear this sound every night that has a beat to it. And Eddie,
I do not remember this at all.
Yeah, so every night they're, if you imagine you're in a campfire, you start to hear drums in the background.
Huh.
And Eddie notices, he's like, man, this sounds like a ZZ Top song. And he says it over and over again. He's like, this is what's great about this book, is it ties in our real world stuff into Roland's world, which is so great.
Yeah.
But he's like, man, this just reminds me of this. And of course I Googled the ZZ Top song. I forget which one it was, but I can hear the song in my head. But yeah, so he's like, man, it's that song. And he starts kind of singing it to himself. And he's like, yeah, like I could swear that's the beat for that song. So he's kind of already hearing that, but he's like, there's no way that would be out here in this mid-world crazy, world away from our world. Like he's in a whole nother universe.
Little
basically.
does he know,
So,
Hey Jude was in the first book.
right, exactly. There's a melding of all worlds, which we come to realize more and more. But yeah, so that's happening. But the God drums and is explained whenever they meet Aunt Tabitha that there's a band of basically marauders of who's left in a post-apocalyptic world, if you will. And there's the Greys and the Pubes, and they're two warring factions, basically, of younger people and older people, or at least that's the way they kind of make it sound. But once you hear the story, it's like it's not necessarily old people. It just seems to be like two sides that are against each other, more or less. But basically, they are very crazy psychopaths, and they've taken over what ultimately is like New York City, if you can imagine. If you like saw what New York City would look like in a post-apocalyptic world, it feels like that.
And that's Lud, right?
That's Lud. That's the city of Lud.
Is there anything else about Aunt Tabitha?
Nothing that comes to mind. Just that she gives Roland the necklace. I think that's all that really comes to mind. She had her eyes burned out by the Greys.
That's
nice. Or by the Pubes.
That's
which
nice.
was sad. Yeah.
Wow.
I believe that's, yeah.
Wow, pubes.
Don't
dark. Be a pube.
Yeah.
Don't be a pube. So Roland and the Ka-Tet, they attempt to go to Lud, which is the city that we were talking about that the pubes inhabit. Mm-hmm. And they are crossing a bridge, and it's where Jake gets snagged.
Yeah, so I believe this is the GWB, the George Washington Bridge in New York, which they allude to eventually. I think that's the bridge they're on.
Oh, they really do compare it to New York.
Yeah, no, it had to be New York, basically. Like,
no, I remember now.
Because
Because there was, I thought for some reason it was like the Brooklyn Bridge, or I don't know. But they were making comparisons to New York, and I was like, what is going on?
Yeah, okay. And exactly, yeah, that which happens, and then like eventually with Father Callahan, which we'll get to eventually, like there's parts of the GWB where they're going on the bridge. So I'm pretty sure the worlds are just laying on top of each other, and in this world they're in a post-apocalyptic New York, and that's what Midworld. I think that's what we're basically ultimately dealing with. But yeah, they're crossing this bridge, and the bridge is tattered into pieces, and there's a section, if you would imagine, like these giant beams that hold up the bridge. They have to cross over that, and while they're crossing over that, they also have to hold on to a wire. I believe it's something like that. So they're all going across the bridge.
How does Susanna make her way across?
Susanna's on Roland's back. Yeah, she's on Roland's back.
What do they do with the wheelchair?
I think they're carrying the wheelchair. I believe.
My God,
yeah, dude. I think they're carrying her wheelchair because they have it on the other side. So yeah, I'm pretty sure they're literally carrying her chair across. Yeah, which is Roland's a beast.
It's not like a nice, like it's like probably a heavy ass.
Oh wheelchair. Yeah, for sure. It's not. They don't get a good one for a while. But yeah, I mean, Roland's a beast. Like he's like, we're gonna get this thing done. But they realize about halfway across, Jake is like, oh my God, I left Oi, which we didn't say his name, but Oi is the Billy Bumbler, this dog, basically a larger dog. He realizes, oh my God, like, what's going to happen? So he's like, Oi, come on. So Oi's terrified. Like, what am I supposed to do? Walk across this beam? I'm a dog. And Oi starts to go across the beam, eventually gets up to Jake, and they're walking and going. And poor Oi, wind blows, and he starts to slip off the edge. So at this point, when he's slipping off the edge, Jake freaks out, jumps, grabs Oi. Oi is about to fall, and all he can do is bite onto Jake's arm. So he bites Jake's arm, Jake starts screaming in pain, but he's okay with it because he's like, just hold on. Roland or Eddie, I think Eddie jumps and grabs Jake, and then Roland has to jump and grab Eddie, I believe. So they're all holding onto each other, chained to save themselves. Now, during this time, all this is happening, they don't realize Gasher, one of my favorite characters of the story, comes into play because he sees them from the other side of the bridge where they're heading and comes out into focus. So they eventually save Jake, pull him back up, get him back on the bridge, and they look forward, and there's a man across there just standing there. And he's like, how you doing? Which, if you haven't listened to the audio, listen to the audio during that part. It's that guy's, he's so good. Your old pal Gasher. Like, it's the funniest voice ever. But basically, they decide, he decides we're going to take his, we didn't say this, but pubes are like highly valuable. Like, they want to get kids. We don't really know what they want to do with them, but they want to steal kids and have them join their gang for whatever weird reason. So Gasher sees him and is like, okay, well, I want to steal this kid. So while they aren't looking, because Roland could have just shot him without even thinking about it, but while they're trying to save Jake, Gasher comes out with a grenade, and they come back, get back on the bridge, and Gasher's standing there, and he's like, hey, I'll throw this grenade at y'all if you don't give me Jake, basically. So ultimately Roland decides, okay, we're going to let him have Jake. They're all like, no.
After we just said.
You're right. He literally said he wouldn't let him fall.
After we just said
But Jake understands the situation and looks at Roland, and Roland's like, I promised you I wouldn't let you fall. And I think Jake even says, he's like, I know you won't. Like, I know you're going to come for me. So he has to,
I'm reading this and going, God damn it, Roland.
Yeah.
You just said it.
But for the sake of everyone, because Gasher, I think what they say is like literally Roland can see in Gasher's eyes that he has the crazy, like, oh no, he'll do this. Like, he's crazy. So he's like, okay, I'm going to let him have him. So Gasher takes Jake, and of course he's like beating him, very rude, just psychopath dude, and just scurries off into the distance, basically. And Roland, Eddie, and Susanna decide to make a plan, giving chase after Jake, but also what they came to do, which we didn't mention, this is what happens at River's Crossing, is they tell them that there's a train that they have to take.
Right, and that's why they got to cross Lud.
And that's why they have to go into the Lud, because they have to take the train, which will take them on their journey.
Deeper into the world.
Deeper into the world, towards the Dark Tower. So that's why they're doing this whole thing. So Roland tells Eddie and Susanna, y'all go find the train station, shoot up a flare in the air, or shoot off the gun, which is their version of a flare. Shoot the gun whenever you find the train station. And I'm going to get Jake, in the meantime. So Roland gets Oi. Oi uses his sense of smell to go after Jake, and they take off going after Gasher, while Eddie and Susanna now go through the city of Lud trying to find the train station. And that's where our Ka-Tet splits for the first time.
So they end up going through Lud, and I think that there might be a couple skirmishes between where Roland and Oi start to look for them, and before the basically introduction to the TikTok man, which is basically like the king of he's like the king. He's like sitting on I just remember him like sitting on a throne, and I think Jake is like almost like in a little cage cell looking thing. I don't know why I think he was like handcuffed or something, like he was.
I
knew he was gonna come.
I think he might have gotten cuffed. I know for sure. So so basically to get to the TikTok man's lair, Gasher and Jake have to go through this maze. If you imagine like going down deeper and deeper into the ground, and just imagine like New York City if you started going underground like through a subway system, but through all these cars piled up and all these booby traps that they have laid out to stop anyone from getting after them. They find their way eventually to the TikTok man, and he's this, I think he's like 6'6", like huge guy, big strong dude. The point they make is that everyone in the town looks like they're like diseased or just beat up, but this guy looks healthy and virile. Like something about him just looks like he's good, but he's also crazy. Like Jake can see in his eyes, this is a crazy person as well.
He's got a bunch of clocks.
He's
like infatuated with clocks.
He's infatuated with clocks.
That's why they call him the TikTok man.
And Jake happens to have a watch from his time. So
it's his dad's?
It's his dad's, I believe. So whenever he sees it, he's like, what is that? Like, he's freaking out, and he's like, what is this? All of a sudden, he asks Jake, tell me about your watch. Jake doesn't realize the things the TikTok man knows because he's in the city of Lud with all these computers. Now, Jake, I believe, mentioned something like, hey, he asked Jake about his watch, and Jake says the word computers. Like, I don't know, like how it works, like computers or something. The TikTok man freaks out. He's like, what do you know about computers? because the TikTok man knows that there's this big underground layer of computers that he wants to control. So he starts to think that Jake knows all about this stuff, though Jake has no idea of what's going on. So he starts to be completely aggressive. I think he punches Jake in the nose. Like, this is a 6'6" man, super huge guy beating up a little kid at this point, which Gasher did already leading up to that point, anyways. But basically, Jake doesn't know what to tell him. He's crying. He's like, I don't know, what you're asking me, basically. But the TikTok man just doesn't believe him, basically. What's his name?
TikTok man?
Yeah, he has like a line of he has a line. I forget his. He does have a name. I can't remember. But a big point is on their way to Lud, they see this plane crashed into the ground, and Jake kind of notices something on the plane. And he's like, "Hey, give me a boost." Gets on top of the plane.
Wait, this is before they get to Lud?
This is before they get to Lud, and he sees a swastika on a plane.
Yes.
And he's like, how is that here in Roland's world? So that's kind of a weird thing he notices. And I believe, if I'm right, inside the plane was a giant body that was almost so big that it shouldn't have fit in the plane. And Roland explains, God, that's the name right there. But anyways, it comes to be understood that this was someone who was in the TikTok man's lineage, so like his grandpa or something like that, which the TikTok man knows about to some degree, but you don't really get much detail beyond that. But basically, Jake says something about Lord Perth, who's in that lineage, and the TikTok man freaks out on him and starts attacking him, like, don't you ever use that name. So there's some kind of weird thing going on there with him having some kind of understanding about what happened there. We don't know, and I don't even think it gets brought up more than that. Yeah, I don't even think they explain it, but that's a really cool part to show how the worlds are blending more and more, so we don't really understand truly how Nazi planes are somehow inside of the world that Roland's in. So somehow our worlds are meshing even more as the beam weakens.
Right. So let's see. Do you remember how Roland basically gets Jake back?
Yes. Yeah.
You can go into it.
Okay. Do you want to take this?
No, you take it, Jake.
Yeah. So eventually Oi leads him there, like the awesome Oi that Oi is. They're outside of almost like a bank safe is how I almost look. They're in like a separate whole area, but it's locked with like a giant, huge metal door, to my recollection. And I think it's actually like two doors, like, a door and then a passageway and a door that goes in, if I remember correctly. But they're locked outside this door. It's got a camera to see the person and a pad that you have to put in, if I remember correctly. Or maybe it can only be open from the inside. But they get to the door. Roland realizes like there's no way we're going to be able to get in here, but we have to figure out some kind of way. So somehow he thinks of this, and he gets Oi and he puts Oi into an air vent, if I remember correctly, and he's like, hey, go find Jake, or something like that. So he tells Oi what to do, which is another thing that's so great about Oi is he's like super duper smart. Literally tells Oi, like, I think with his mind, or maybe he says it out loud.
Can communicate.
Yeah,
I think that's what the big thing that makes Oi invaluable.
Yes, without a doubt.
Oi understands them.
Yeah, and basically, I think he gives Oi the mission of like get inside or tell Jake, send Jake, because he knows Jake has the touch. Roland does, and I think he says like send Jake, the information to open the door, like to find a way to open the door so that I can get in there and save him. So Oi gets up in this air duct and goes out, and then we flash back to, of course, what Jake's going through with the TikTok man while he's about to be beat up and they're arguing. He looks and sees Oi up in an air vent for a second. He's like, oh my God, like there's Oi. So if I remember correctly, at some point, Jake knows where the button is to open the door. So Jake finds a way to get closer to the button. If I remember correctly, either he pulls a gun, he finds a way to get his hand on a gun, or Oi jumps through the vent first and attacks Gasher or the TikTok man. But at some point, maybe Oi jumps down. Somehow they get distracted. Oi gets, I know for sure he bites Gasher, because I remember them like worrying about him getting like Gasher's infected blood or something. And then, or maybe I just worried about that when I was reading the book.
He's gross. Like he was like,
yeah, he's diseased.
Like,
he's
almost
about to
like
die.
Leprosy or something.
Yeah, he's on the verge of death, and he tells them to. He's like, I'm about to die. So I was
I'm about to die.
I'm like, oh my God, Oi, don't bite him. But then of course he bites the TikTok man. I think he gets injured for somehow, like the TikTok man like grabs him and like throws him or something and like injures poor little Oi. But that gives Jake enough time to hit the door, buzzer, let Roland come in, and of course Roland does what he does, starts blasting everybody. If I remember correctly, the TikTok man gets shot in his head, but he doesn't die.
You're gonna say he didn't die?
Yeah, he gets like they explained it's like something that occasionally can happen where like the bullet like hit his skull and didn't go all the way through or something. I mean, he had like a flap of skin, I remember, hanging off his head because the man in black, at the end of that whole ordeal, the man in black walks into the room and like pulls at it, like pulls at the flap on his skin or something. And I remember them talking about that. And I was like, God, he's so freaking weird. But yeah, so Roland gets in there, does what he does. Now, during all that time, Eddie and Susanna are having their way towards making their way towards the train.
Making the way to Blaine the Mono train.
Blaine the Mono.
So they have a couple skirmishes.
They have a skirmish. Theirs is really cool. This, again, is so cinematic, but they're basically going through town, which is, I imagine, like, I get anxiety reading it because I'm like, this would be the scariest thing in the world if, like, you heard, like, a bunch of commotion and you're like, what's going on? You know, you're walking in what are empty streets, imagine, like, New York City.
It's like guerrilla warfare.
But, yeah, and around a corner you hear, like, a whole bunch of people, so you're like, oh, my God. So you like look over there and they're like getting ready to like murder some guy, if I remember correctly. Like they're about to like send someone to be hung or something like that. And all of a sudden someone looks around and it's a little kid. And the little kid's like, hey, come with us. We're about to go hang him and send him. I think they say send him on like the rail or something, like, we're going to hang him. So they're like, hey, it's like a little kid. He sounds like cheerful. He's like, hey, come on, we're going to go hang this guy. And they're like kind of just staring at him. And then he starts getting closer. And as he gets closer, they realize it's a little person who looks like an old man. And all of a sudden, he pulls out he's about to pull out a grenade. And then Susanna's like, hey, don't move. And he keeps going, and she just has to blast him and just boom, kills him. And then when she kills him, of course, that makes people start to turn around like, what's going on? So if you imagine this mob of like psychos, you know, in this post-apocalyptic world, and if I remember correctly, they just kill a few and then they start to scatter it. Kind of like, they kind of put
because they're not like really trained. They're just like,
yeah, they're just easily scared off.
These guys are gunslingers. They're here to kill. These guys don't, you know, they're not really fighting. Fighter. Like, you know,
they don't have guns. Very few people have guns in the mid-world place.
So they end up getting to Blaine. Or do they meet up with Oy?
No, they get to Blaine first.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they get to Blaine, I think now that they're waiting. They're waiting for Roland, Jake, and Oy. And does anything happen between that and them meeting up?
Yeah, so this is what kind of sets everything off. So when they get to Blaine, they're trying to figure out how to, like, what's going on. Like, they don't know what's what, but they're told, do not go to the cradle. The cradle is the train station. Like, do not go to the cradle. The people, after they shoot the little person, the poor guy, well, he was trying to kill them.
We're going to go hang somebody.
But after they shoot, it's literally like that. Like, we're going to go hang him.
It's Tuesday.
But after they shoot that guy, they threaten some of the other people, like, hey, we're trying to get to the cradle. Show us how to get there. And they're so terrified, like, we won't go all the way there. Like, we'll take you some of the way, but, like, you're going to have to kill us. Like, we're not going to go into the cradle because we'll get killed. We'll get blasted with lasers or something like that. So it sounds kind of crazy. But when they get there, they all of a sudden see this giant pink train. And it's like, okay, like, they have this ominous feeling like, okay, something's kind of weird here. And they want to get the train on. So they get to, I believe when they get to the train station, I think they're trying to figure out what they have to do. And then all of a sudden a booming voice comes on, if I remember correctly, and that's Blaine. He wakes up and they hear Blaine talking through the intercom. And it's so loud that if I remember correctly, it goes through all of the city. Yeah. And it's basically like a giant intercom going through all of the city. But what Blaine tells him is to get on the plane, to get on the train, they'll have to answer a riddle, basically. And
the riddles are introduced already?
Yeah, immediately.
Okay.
And the riddle is a keypad they see. And the riddle is to get on the train, you have to prime the pump backwards. So they're like, what does that mean? Prime the pump backwards. That's the riddle leading up to this, basically. And I can't remember if they first figure it out or they wait until Roland gets there. I think they figured out when Roland gets there. But basically what happens is they know that Blaine likes riddles. Somehow Blaine asks them, Blaine asks them, he's like, do you know any riddles? And he asks them that. And then Eddie is like, well, we don't know too many, but our friend Roland does. And he's like, oh, he gets excited. And he waits
for the challenge.
Yeah, I think like they say, Stephen King writes that Blaine has like almost like a like hunger in his voice. Like, oh, he knows riddles? Like, that's what he craves. Like, he craves the mental challenge of, computing riddles, basically. So he goes, his intercom arrives where Roland is. So Roland and Jake just killed the TikTok man. Then all of a sudden Blaine pops into their area through the intercom, and he said, "Are you Roland of Gilead?" And he's like, "Yes." And he's like, "All right, do you know riddles?" And he's like, "Yes." So he's like, "Follow me." So Blaine gets them out of the city, takes them straight to the cradle, and they decide to get in. The priming of the pump backwards it's a keypad with like a whole bunch of numbers, and Susanna gets in her genius mind, realizes they're talking about prime numbers, and you basically have to press all the prime numbers but in reverse that are on the keypad. And that's how they get onto Blaine.
So at this point, they are trying. So they're going to get on the train, which is what they wanted to do, to take them deeper into Midworld, to get closer to the tower. And so they already don't feel good. Like they don't feel good about getting on the train, but they know that this is like a means to an end, or the end, I should say, to the Dark Tower. And I think that the train ride seems normal enough. And I think Blaine's like talking to them, and it doesn't seem like anything's weird. And I remember that, they're looking out the window and seeing like all the different landscapes change because they're going super fast. And then things get really weird. And I think Blaine basically was like gonna go kamikaze mode. And he's like, this rail doesn't go on forever, and I'm basically going to run myself off of it, killing all of you. And the only way to stop this is if we can play this game of riddles.
Yes.
And I think they're answering riddles back and forth, and I think Roland is telling the riddles and the computer's figuring it out, and then the computer's doing one, Blaine's doing one, and they figure it out, and then they're coming to this point where they like have to stump him because time is running out. And
so it's just them asking Blaine. All they have to do is stump Blaine. He doesn't get them back, but they just have to just stump him once. But Blaine's obviously this supercomputer.
He's heard them all.
Thing, basically. So what happens, how they realize he's crazy is Blaine tells him, "Hurry up and get on. You have about he gives him a countdown to get on." And he gets everyone on the train, and then releases a toxin gas throughout the city that kills everybody. And that's when they realize he's crazy. So they're leaving, and all of a sudden this purple gas, if I remember correctly, starts going out. And when it touches anyone's skin, immediately they start bubbling and dying. And Blaine has the ability to turn the cabin walls clear and translucent. So he opens up the cabin wall so they can see the entire city as they're escaping, going through the grasslands and everything. Everyone who gets touched by it is getting murdered. So they're like, "Oh my God, this is a crazy freaking train." So they realize it's a crazy train, Ozzy Osbourne style. They realize that it's a crazy train they're on. And Blaine basically tells them, and what's cool is, we forgot to mention this, but that book that Jake gets at the bookstore is called Charlie the Choo Choo. Jake has this weird feeling about the book. He says it looks weird and it's something strange. And whenever he was
scary, there was something scary about it. Even though there wasn't anything scary about it, there was something. I don't really know how to explain it. He knew something was wrong with it. There was something evil, but it didn't look evil. But he knew there was malicious intent somewhere in that face.
He literally said, I think he says behind that smile, he's like, he's crazy behind that smile. I can tell. So if you remember, as we were talking about Jake having that crazy book moment where he was writing a book, during that book report he was writing, he kept writing Blaine as a pain. So he was already foreseeing this with his touch. So he knew that there was a train coming. He knew something was wrong with it, and he knew it was called Blaine, basically. So once he sees it, Jake freaks out. He's like, "Oh my God, this is it." He knows something's wrong with the train. So Jake was already on top of knowing something weird and bad was coming with this train. So at that point, he's like, this is exactly what we signed up for. So leading up to Blaine, Roland talks about riddles. So, of course, universes spinning around their heads. So they almost were getting ready for what was happening. But Roland happened to talk to them about the olden day while they were on their way to Lud. And he talks about riddling and how important riddles are. And Eddie, and this always reminded me of Tim Chambers, one of me and Alex's old friends. But Eddie likes to tell dead baby jokes. Which is, if you remember, it's what's a dead baby stapled to a whatever. Those are those super dark jokes, if y'all remember those jokes. Terrible jokes, right? But Eddie likes to tell those kind of jokes.
Because he's a screwed up individual.
He's a screwed up individual. But Roland comes from a time where riddles were so important you'd be killed over them if you tried to cheat. Like riddles were used to.
It was like a gentleman's game.
It was a gentleman's game, exactly, and they're really important to him in his time. So Roland gets disgusted with Eddie, like to a high level when Eddie starts telling these jokes. He's like basically just like, dude, like that's seriously not okay. Talking shit, making Eddie like feel bad about himself basically for doing it. So that's a big part leading up to this point. When he gets there, he realizes he's like, okay, we're gonna have to riddle Blaine. I'll go first, and then each of you go first. And Jake also happened to get a book of riddles too, just the natural knowing of what was happening in the universe. He had a book of riddles with him as well from the bookstore. So he tells everyone we're going to go, and he goes, Jake, if there's something special in your book, we're going to have you go last. And then he said, Eddie, just chill out. Don't do any of your stupid riddles. So like Eddie's already feels like an idiot. He's like, sit down, like just don't do what you're doing.
Eddie.
You know, so he feels like an idiot. And they even talk about like how he feels kind of like hurt by that, by not being like called upon in that moment, but it's because he does these stupid jokes. So that kind of sets up what's happening here at this point. And Blaine says that, yeah, like we're going to riddle, and if you don't stop me, if you can't beat me, I'm going to crash us. I'm going to drive us right off the cliff here.
So basically what happens, it comes down to Eddie, and everyone's looking at him, and then he's kind of like, fuck this.
So so the book ends technically the book ends without us knowing what happens. It ends
Does
on the
it
journey.
really?
Yeah, which is why it's a cliffhanger, the most annoying cliffhanger they do. And even Stephen King talks about it. I believe at the end of the book, he does a, whatever you call that, you know, an epilogue. And he talks in his own voice and says, I apologize for ending this story like this. I know my readers are going to be upset with me, but this is just the way the Dark Tower has called me to write it. So he literally ends it with them on the journey. Like you don't know.
Well, that was one way to draw an audience for the next one.
Right. Make sure you come back. All you know is they're off to riddle. I don't even know if they might do a few riddles, but I don't even think you get any riddles yet. I think it's just, here's what's going to happen. Me versus you, Roland. And it like ends like that. Like it's your
train zooms out, cameras coming up.
But what's so sick is like they go through all these worlds. The train, which we'll realize in the next book, is going through like thinnies and stuff because
and that's
they're
what
going
I was saying
into crazy worlds, like psycho worlds.
That's what I was saying. Like whenever I remember that because you're looking out the window and you're seeing all of like the landscaping changing to different landscapes. You're going through forests, you're going through mountains, you're going through like over lakes. It was like a bunch of like different landscapes basically. And I was like, dude, they're hauling ass. Like,
I think they say the speed. I think Blaine does. We'll have to get that. But basically, there's a cool scene where they're going and Blaine's like leaving the, cabin translucent, and if you imagine it, you're like riding through a forest and then going through a bunch of trees and whatever, then all of a sudden you jump out and I think they say they're like 500, 600 feet in the air. You're just up in the sky, basically, all of a sudden on a rail track up in the sky, and you're over like a lava world, basically, where like the world's exploded underneath you. And that's like, I think that's when they've gone into like a thinny and they're in another, going through another world. And then Blaine, of course, being a terrible, evil train, is like, would you like to see the Earth magnified? So he shows them up close what the Earth looks like, because they can't see it. They're so high up. They can just see down that it's like lava and stuff. And he's like, would you like to see the magnified, like the Earth's, the ground? And he just shows them without them even asking for it. And it's like the most scariest looking creatures, if you can imagine, like the most freakiest looking things. They describe some of them, and it's just so wild to think about. Like they're in a whole nother world, basically, as they're traveling through the universes, basically, as Blaine has them on this mono.
Dang. I actually don't remember it ending like that. I mean, I guess maybe because I had all the
might
books.
be in the next book, the seeing the stuff in the ground, but it's somewhere all around there. I think that happens before the book ends, because I think after that, Blaine talks about the challenge. Like, okay, like let's start a.
That's right. He talks about the challenge, and then that's how it ends.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And what happens is I think Roland has to make the bet. Like, I think Blaine says, like, if you haven't noticed, I'm going insane, and says, like, I plan on killing us. And then knowing that Blaine loves to riddle, Roland offers the challenge. Like, hey, let's have a challenge like we used to have. They challenged what was called the Fair Day Goose. And he's like, let's have a challenge, but our goose is going to be our lives. So if we beat you, Blaine, you have to let us live. If not, you can continue and crash us like you want to do. And that sets up the next book.
Golly. Well, so before we end it, I want to tell you something. There was I don't know if I ever told you this. When me and Dina were in Austin, this is when I was reading I want to say the last two books of the Dark Tower. We were hiking in Austin, and there was a trail. We'd never been here. We just pulled like, hey, random hiking spots, whatever. We went down. It took us like into this like, followed this little creek, and it was going over like different bridges and stuff. And I was getting this weird sensation walking up to like this cement pillar. And at this time I was reading a lot of, this is what I was reading. And I remember looking down, I just felt like weird sensations, like turn and look at this pillar. And there was graffiti all over it, and like just different like trippy, not trippy, I mean, it was just like randomized, like different images and different words. And I was like, man, this is crazy. And I remember like looking down at the base, because it was slanted where it came down. And I remember looking at it, and like, as I was looking into it, I felt like I was like leaning forward, and I didn't know like what it was. And Dina had walked behind me, but I had stopped, and I'm looking at this, and this thing was just like warping. It was doing this weird thing. I was sober.
Yeah.
I was sober.
Yeah. That's so wild.
Wasn't drinking, wasn't doing anything.
Yeah.
And I remember just looking, going like, this is so weird. And I remember like in different angles, like it would stop, but then I would stay in this one position, and it would start warping again. I swear
That's
to God.
so weird.
And I was like, dude, like this is probably like what it must have been like to be pulled by the tower.
Yeah.
And I'm not even making this up. I swear to my
it was
honest,
just weird.
like mental capacity that this happened.
Did you ever look up to see what it was?
No, like I remember like looking to see if like there was like maybe weird paint palettes that they could like mix and maybe make it like have like a, you know, like a visual effect, but I couldn't find anything.
But did you look at what did you ever like Google what the pillar was? Like to see,
because
like,
I didn't know where it was. Like I didn't
what
know
if
where
it was some
were.
like religious or like, you know, old like relic, you know, like it just had
That
some
was
strange
so
cool.
wild. But I remember telling Dina, and I was like, look at this. And she saw it too. I don't know if she'll remember it like I did.
Yeah.
But like I just remember being like,
She had the same experience though.
I want to say that she's like, yeah, it does look kind of weird, but I was no, this is weird, like supernatural wild.
Yeah, that's
I
wild.
thought it was the craziest thing,
Right.
and I was like, dude, and I was like, I'm gonna touch it, and I was like, no, don't touch
So
it.
they told you
I
not
was
to.
like, don't touch it, don't touch
just-
it. I'd have fell into some weird dimension, like,
Yeah.
Cthulhu, like reaching in, like, you fell in my trap, like, flaying my mind. But yeah.
Mind flayer.
Well, I think, dang, what a way to open up the next one for your favorite book.
Yeah. We'll lead into the next book. It's so wild, you know, and I always talk about this being cinematic. This book would be the weird part of the story, because if you were to make a season of TV, the entire cast would be a different cast. That's how weird book 4 is, if I'm calling the right book, because it's Roland's history. It's the entire
unless they like
story
trickle
of
it
his
in
history.
throughout the entire show, which I could see them doing.
Yeah, I could see that too. I could see that. But I would like them to give, because of what happens throughout it, which we'll get into in the next book. I would like for them to just give it its own,
its own thing.
Yeah, and inside the book, they do harken back to reality, to the actual present time that they're going through a few steps. So you would still get the main, you know, cast and stuff, but it is very heavy about the history of Roland and
That
his
story
previous
is
Ka-Tet.
real dark fantasy.
Oh yeah,
That's
No,
like
it's-
dark fantasy.
yeah,
Like Wastelands definitely seems like a supernatural western. The next one, Wizard and Glass, is definitely fantasy.
Yeah,
for
it's
sure.
called Wizard and Glass. You know, like it is straight up. It is straight up that. Yeah, it gets very, very. We'll just say very fantasy. Yeah,
I feel like
I don't want to give it
that
away.
one was everyone's favorite. I feel like anyone that I talked to that read the series has said Wizard and Glass is my favorite one.
Yeah, which is a trip, because it's like the favorite is one that's not even like, in a sense, it doesn't feel like it's canon, because it's like, well, this pretend, it's just the history. It's like, this isn't the actual storyline we're on, but it's just so great. It's so well done, and it sets up Roland, and of course the audiobook is read so well, which is how I ingest the Dark Tower. So
One of my
just done
favorite
so
quotes
well.
is in that book.
Which one is that?
I think I told you already. Is the coffin
Coffin Hunter?
coffin hunters, and I guess some guy did a deed for him. He was like, sir,
Oh,
you can-
Yeah, I think we talked about that when they were talking about our favorite
are you going
books.
to pay me in gold? He's like, no, lead.
Yeah, the best.
It's like, oh God,
Yeah.
what a gangster thing to say before you screw somebody out of a deal.
Yeah,
You piece of shit.
I'm telling you, man, that you have to go back over some of these with the audiobook, man. It's so funny because the guy's voice is like, "No, buddy, I'm paying you in lead." Like the way he does the voice is so good.
Hell yeah. Well, I'm glad you came over and did this.
Yeah. This was a late nighter for y'all who don't know. This is like we just watched some freaking wrestling and got here, so I'm like, it's midnight, literally.
Yeah, my brain's melted.
Yeah.
Sorry if my enthusiasm was.
Yeah. Listeners, if the energy wasn't there, we'll do better next time. I felt like I was like halfway through, I started to come alive. You know, at first I was like, this coffee started to kick in about halfway in, but at first I was like, let's get it together, baby. But I feel pretty good now.
Come on. All right, cool, man. Appreciate
watching us on the video. Appreciate you. I'm glad to be here. Appreciate y'all.
Hell yeah.